Now for tonight's program, Planting Native Plants for Birds by Peggy Burhenn. In this program, Peggy will explain the connection between birds and native plants, what birds need from our landscapes, and how we can best provide those needs. Peggy will also describe the best time to plant native plants for greatest success and how to manage them to support birds in your area. Peggy is a master gardener and certified California naturalist. As a master gardener, she oversees the native plant garden in the Seven Sisters demonstration garden in San Luis Obispo and works on the Arroyo Grande Master Gardener Helpline. Her interests in gardening are growing food plants for people and to support nature. To these ends, she focuses on growing vegetables, herbs, fruits, trees, and native plants. Her home includes houses for bats, birds, owls, and mason bees. She volunteers regularly at Cal Poly Herbarium and as a docent for California state parks, focusing her time at the Pismo Monarch Butterfly Grove and leading native plant walks. As a citizen scientist, she's banded birds, collected spiders, counted butterflies and birds, and regularly posts her finds on iNaturalist and eBird. In addition to the talk tonight, Peggy has provided us with an information sheet from the UC Master Gardeners of SLO County on native plant care. I will put a link to that sheet in the chat for all of you to access. And you can also find it on the gardening resources page of our website. And now let us welcome Peggy Burhenn.
Hello, hi everybody. Welcome, and it's so great to speak with you. I'm just going to hide the video so I don't have to see myself, but hopefully you can all see me and you can see my slides. Thank you for that introduction. We're going to talk about gardening for birds with native plants, but I think many of you are familiar with the Master Gardeners, but just to give you a little brief overview is just our role is really to educate and advise home gardeners. So we do educational programs, public events, and community projects. And you probably are familiar with our helpline, but we have 3 locations: Arroyo Grande, San Luis Obispo, and Templeton, and these are the hours and the phone numbers, etc. You can also email us questions too. So feel free to let us know if you have questions about your gardening. And then we do have the demonstration garden, which Wendy mentioned. It's on Sierra Way in SLO. We hold a program on the 3rd Saturday of the month, our advice to grow by, but we are dark in November and December because of the holidays. So we do private tours also unavailable. They're available on request. And then we have a variety of different gardens. As she mentioned, I oversee the native plant garden that's there. So I may refer to things that are in our demonstration garden. That's the Garden of the Seven Sisters, and that's I'll refer to that from time to time. So I love birds. I'm kind of a bird nerd in addition to a plant nerd, and I want to help the birds. So this is from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they say there are 7 simple actions we can do to help the birds. And one of them is less lawn and plant natives. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that's important today. So the reason we want, oops, I went one too many, sorry. The reason we want to plant native plants for birds is because the birds pretty much are native, right? And they evolved with the native plants. So this is a picture of some cedar waxwings on a coast live oak. All the pictures of birds and plants are pictures that I've taken in my yard or in the garden of the Seven Sisters. So apologies, I am not a professional photographer, but I love cedar waxwings and I love welcoming them to my yard. I get so excited when they come. So first, a lot of people say like, well, what is a California native plant? Like, how do you define a native plant, right? Maybe it's a plant that's been here for how many years? So when you look at native plants, we have over 5,000 California native plants. but they're from very diverse communities. So you can have a plant in the wetlands or have plants in the desert. And depending on where you live, they may or may not grow, right? Because it may not be the right habitat. But usually we use the definition of prior to European contact. So before the Europeans came to the United States, what plants were here, right? And that's sort of the dividing line. And native plants are also plants that provide food and shelter for native animals and insects, and they've evolved to grow in our climate and in our soils. But again, a lot of diverse communities in California native plants. So why would you want to attract birds to your garden? Well, one reason may be just to kind of help them out, because about 30%, there's about a 30% decline in songbirds, and this was reported in Science Journal. And the main reasons that birds are declining is the cats, outdoor cats are eating them, killing them. They hit windows, they have diseases, climate change is changing their environment, and they're losing habitat. So there are a lot of reasons, it's not just one. But the World Conservation Union says that approximately 12% of all bird species worldwide are threatened. So whatever we can do to help them, I think it's a good idea. So other benefits of native plants, which you probably have heard some of this before. Typically, we think of them as saving water, but clearly plants that grow in a wetland probably are going to need a lot of water. So it's not always 100% true, but they tend to need less water. They tend to use whatever water is in that environment if we put the plant in the right environment, right? They save time and money. So here's the big secret I'm going to let you in on is that, so I'm oversee the native plant garden. There's not that much to do. So I don't have to fertilize. I don't put pesticides on them. And there's very little pruning unless like they're in the way. I cut them to keep them out of the path. So I kind of feel like it's the perfect plant for me because most of these plants have very little maintenance. It also then helps us reduce chemical use, right? If you're not having to put pesticides on, you don't have the chemicals running off into our creeks and to our watershed. And we don't want to use chemicals because we want native insects to come to our plants. So I'm kind of a lazy gardener and native plants work for me. Now, Wendy did mention Doug Tallamy. You're going to hear from him next month, which is awesome. You're going to love him. These are two of his books, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope. And maybe you've already picked them up. But he's an entomologist. And his whole point kind of that I've gleaned out of these two books is that native plants promote native wildlife. And if we want to help native wildlife, we need to plant native plants. And most land is privately owned. So a lot of us think, well, we should like preserve the park and we'll put native plants in the park. But if most of the land is privately owned, then it's really up to us as either homeowners or landowners to bring the native plants back. And he states that even a few plants will make a difference because native plants support native insects, and that's really going to help our birds too. So when you think about attracting birds to your garden, I like to think about, well, what do I want to attract? What are you looking to attract? Are you looking to attract songbirds? Are you looking to attract specific type of bird like a hummingbird or even like my cedar waxwings? If there's a specific bird, we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So to attract them, we need to figure out what they want, right? What do they eat and what's their habitat for the most part? Because I live out in the kind of the fields of Arroyo Grande, I'm probably not going to attract too many water birds. But those of you in Los Osos, if you live near the beach, you may attract more things like that to your yard. So what do birds need? Well, they need food, right? And usually birds are eating either seeds, berries, or insects. And they need protection from predators, they need nesting sites, and they need water to some extent if they don't get it out of their environment and their food. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these things, and I'm also going to talk about some of the plants that can help us do this. So obviously a lot of plants have seeds, or we wouldn't get new plants. Here's a lesser goldfinch on the red salvia. But here's some of my favorite plants that make a lot of seeds: buckwheats, California aster, yarrows, salvias, coyote brush, even willows, so some trees, and ceanothus. So those are some things to think about putting in your yard. Things with berries there's a lot of things that are great for the birds with berries. Manzanitas, toyon, prunus, which hollyleaf cherry is our local native, coffee berry, different currants or ribes, elderberry, snowberry, fuchsia flowering gooseberry, and even poison oak. So poison oak is thought to be one of the best plants in some ways for birds because it produces a lot of berries and it provides a lot of cover. So I know we're all not wild about having poison oak in our yard, but if you do have an area kind of off to the side or that you don't need to trample through that supports poison oak, there's no reason to take it out. Then it could help the birds. So here's a western bluebird with the coffee berry. When my coffee berry produces berries, I have a ton of western bluebirds going in there and eating the berries. It's a magnet for them. They love it. So birds like insects too. And what we know about native plants is they attract more native insects. And Doug Tallamy will probably talk about this. Here's some information that I got out of some of his books, is that native plants will attract 3 to 4 times more insects than non-native. And we're going to look at some charts where you'll see even more than that. But just on average, it's 3 to 4 times more insects. And that 96% of land birds, they feed insects to their chicks. And about half of those insects are caterpillars. So we really want to promote caterpillars, and oak trees attract more caterpillars than any other plant. Now, some of Doug Tallamy's work, he's in Pennsylvania, so it's been on the East Coast. But we've also have some folks that are working on a similar project. This is from Doug and Kathy Kramer. They gave me permission to use this chart that they put together, where they went out and they looked at native plants and non-native plants, and what was their reproductive value to attracting butterflies and moths? Because really that's what we want, right? We want those butterflies and moths that make those caterpillars so we can feed the birds. So what they found is I'm gonna put another slide up that shows what, it's hard to read the names on the bottom here, but for the purposes of this slide, I just want you to know that all the green bars, those are native plants. And those are the numbers up on the left side of how many different butterflies and moths they were attracted to that plant. So the first one is oak, which we just talked about. It's an amazing plant for producing caterpillars. All the red bars are cultivars, so non-native plants. And the first ones on there are like acacia, cotton Easter, eucalyptus, forget-me-not, fennel. So they attract a lot less insects. And then I'm going to blow up for you on the next slide, the green bars. These are the plants in order of species that will lay eggs on this plant, or number of species, sorry, that will lay eggs on this plant from that previous slide. So oak is number 1, hollyleaf cherry, currants and ribes, California lilac, maples, California rose, not to be confused with cultivated roses, lupins, manzanitas, California sages, goldenrod, ocean spray, California honeysuckle, and penstemon. So when you're going to those native plant sales, maybe print out this page and see what you can find that might support these species in your yard. I'm going to talk about several of these plants in a little bit more detail, but just to give you an idea from their research, and Doug and Kathy Kramer are in Northern California in the Bay Area. So they have similar types of native plants in most cases to us. Birds also need shelter. So if you can provide some trees and some bushes and some nesting material, that is helpful. They love the coast live oaks for that reason too. They provide a lot of shelter. Some plants that I really like for nesting and shelter, one is coyote brush or baccharis. And this is some of the fluff on the left-hand side of the coyote brush that it makes. And that's great for nesting material. It also provides a ton of seeds, and the bush tits go crazy over this. They're just like flitting on these bushes when they're in seed. So that's a great plant. This is a ceanothus on the right. It just happens to have a bumblebee, excuse me, not a bird. And in my yard, I have several of these that make mounds about 3 to 5 feet wide and just a couple, 2-3 feet tall. And a lot of birds like to nest underneath it. I have thrashers in there, California towhees. So it's also a good plant for shelter and nesting. And as I mentioned, the oaks, of course, that's like the super plant. Oh, there we go. So if you can provide water, it's great, but a lot of the birds will get the water they need, especially chaparral birds, from the berries and things that they're eating and the insects. However, they all love a bird bath. So here's some Lawrence goldfinches in my bird bath. Actually put some corks in there to float so that the bees could like get onto the corks and get a little bit of water. But if you have a water source, it's important to change the water every couple of days or to have some type of moving water system so you don't get mosquitoes. We want to encourage some insects, but not all insects. So now maybe you want to attract a specific bird. So I remember I showed you that picture of the waxwings, and I really love those birds and I want to attract them to my yard. Audubon, the Audubon Society at audubon.org, they have a website that's really cool where you can put in, all I did was put in waxwings. And then I put in where I was located, and it came up with a list of a lot of plants that would be attractive to cedar waxwings and also attractive to a lot of other birds. As you can see on here, there's an arrow and there's several different types of birds that this plant in particular attracts, but black sage. And I have a lot of black sage growing in my yard. So that might be one of the reasons that the waxwings are attracted to coming in there. So the black sage makes a lot of seeds, and the birds love that. So if you're looking for a specific bird, you can go into this website and see what you can find, what plants that might be good for that bird. I also went back then and I said, well, okay, let me do Los Osos. So I put in your zip code and I said, well, let's attract hummingbirds down here. I picked hummingbirds and then I picked nectar. I want to get nectar for hummingbirds. What could I plant? Now I got a whole list that got emailed to me, but I just picked the top 10 to put on the slide to show, hey, hummingbirds like black sage too. That's a good plant. And then here's a whole list of things that might grow well in Los Osos that could attract hummingbirds to your yard. And some of them may be plants that you hadn't thought of. So when you're out at those native plant nurseries, and if you're interested in attracting hummingbirds, you might want to take a look at these plants as well and see if they would be good for your yard. So hummingbirds do tend to like long tubular flowers. Of course, they also want insects too. And there's a good plant that blooms in the fall. I know you're going to talk about this next time about getting plants to grow and bloom at different seasons. And that's really important for the birds too. So the California fuchsia has those nice flowers for the hummingbirds, and it blooms in the fall when a lot of our flowers are starting to wind down. We also want to look at what blooms in the winter, because again, most of the plants that we have are flowering in the spring and summertime, right? So if you look at agaves, yuccas, manzanitas, those will bloom in the winter. My manzanitas that I have in my yard typically are blooming in January. So when very little is in bloom, the manzanitas in bloom. And bladderpod. Okay, bladderpod's a great plant. It blooms almost all year round. And it's very easy, requires very little water. And if it will grow in your area, it might be something that you want to try. It grows very easily from seed as well. So another great website, if you're looking for plants that will grow in your area, native plants, is Calscape, and it's calscape.org. And you go into the advanced search, and there you can put in a lot of different categories. So what I did my zip code for Arroyo Grande, and it came up with 71 plants. And I said, well, I don't really want to water very much. So give me something that's extremely low water, very low, or low. I checked all of those. And I'm a lazy gardener, so give me something very easy, moderately easy. And it's for birds. We're talking about attracting birds. And of course, I want it to be commonly available, because it's frustrating to have someone recommend a plant and then you can't find it, right? You know how that is. So it came up with 71 plants. This is just the first page that I took a screenshot of to show you. And if you click on each one of these, it will tell you a lot about the needs of the plant. Like, does it sun or shade? Is it fast draining soil? How big is it going to get? It's a great website for looking at if you're in the nursery and you say, oh, Big Berry Manzanita, that looks like a great plant, but how big is that going to get? What do I, is that going to grow in my area? So keep this website handy because it will definitely be a good resource for you about not only which ones to plant, but then there's also some care involved. It tells you a little bit about the care that might be needed. And it also tells you if it attracts birds, butterflies, or other insects, bees. So I like to say raptors are birds too, and I like to attract raptors to my yard. So for that reason, I keep dead trees. So if you kill something, don't feel bad about it. Just leave it for the birds. And so if you can cultivate leaving dead trees, having open fields, we don't have to landscape everything, then the birds will come. Trying to put layers in. So we have some things that are tall, some things that are median height. A lot of the literature will say that a perch for a raptor should be 15 to 20 feet tall. That's pretty high to, install something. I have owl boxes in my yard and they're only about 10 feet tall. And the birds the raptors, they come and sit on those, both the owls and the hawks during the day, the owls at night and the hawks during the day. So think about that. Sometimes I like to say that I live on a ground squirrel farm. We have so many ground squirrels. I was so happy to see this red-tailed hawk take one down. So it's important to, allow that to happen. So we want to be sure we don't use pesticides, because if the rodents get pesticides in their system, then of course that gets transferred to our raptors. They also will take snakes, which I'm not real happy about because I love the snakes. The snakes are taking my rodents and helping me with that. But every once in a while, the red tails take my snakes. I haven't figured out a way to stop that. So another thing is to consider being messy. I like to leave some bare ground and or just bark on some bare ground, because with that leaf litter, the insects like to live in there. So the Xerces Society has this new, well, it's not that new, several years they've had this campaign called Leave the Leaves. And the more that we can leave leaves around our plants, then the insects are going to lay eggs on the plants. The caterpillars are going to fall to the ground and they're going to live in there, and the birds are going to find them, and it's really going to help the cycle. But it also helps to keep the moisture in. It fertilizes the plants a little bit. And, you can do things to make it a little bit more appealing, like put edging around, or maybe put in some paths or a bench. So try to make your messy ground look good. There's ways to do that. So now I want to talk about a few of my favorite plants and that I think you might want to consider putting in your yard. And of course, we've learned number one, coast live oak. I'm sure Doug Tallamy is going to talk about that, how important the oaks are. This is a great tree. I think all of you are familiar with it. It's evergreen. It flowers in the winter to spring, but it can get really tall. So some people are a little worried about putting it in a small yard, but it's going to take like 40 or 50 years probably to get that tall. So it's really something that I'm planting a lot of oaks. And I'm also do a class on growing oaks from acorns. So I try to add more oaks to my property when I can. I think it's a great plant. So consider that. Maybe you don't have room for that. So another one of my favorite plants is California buckwheat. It's a small shrub. This one is growing alongside my driveway. I'm required to mow brush, so I mow this down to the ground, well, about 6 inches, and it pops back up like this and looks beautiful. It's evergreen. It flowers most of the year, spring, summer, fall. In the fall, those white balls turn a rust color, and I use them to make flower arrangements out of in all seasons with all the different colors. And there is absolutely no irrigation here. So once these are established, and we haven't had much water, and they look great without any water. And they do attract a ton of butterflies as well. The birds love the seeds, so you'll have a lot of birds in there gathering the seeds. Hollyleaf cherry. So another one of these, a great plant that stays evergreen. There's several of these growing. If you go to our demonstration garden, this is a picture from the demonstration garden. They are pretty tall right now. I'd say they're probably 15 to 20 feet tall. So it could be a good screening tool or method to use as a screen, but you can also, keep it trimmed down if you want to keep it lower than that. Flowers in the winter to spring. You can see the big red berries that the birds love. It's somewhat deer resistant. I always have to give a caveat with deer resistant because any of you that live where there's deer, you know that deer will eat almost anything, right? But once it gets bigger, this is going to be deer resistant. I would protect it if it's small. I put wire cages around most of my plants until they get a little bit tall because I've seen deer eat almost everything. Very low water and cold tolerant. This is another picture from the Garden of the Seven Sisters. This is our ribes. It's red flowering currant. It is deciduous, so it's going to lose its leaves in the winter, but it has these beautiful flowers that come out in late winter and early spring, and then these dark purple berries in the fall. It says it can get about 6 to 10 feet tall. This one's been in there quite a while, and I'd say it's about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. So I don't know that, 10 feet, I think is a little bit on the high end. Again, somewhat deer resistant, but nice about this, it will tolerate some shade. So a lot of the plants that we have in this garden are full sun, but this one can go in shade as well. So the California lilac, there are so many different varieties of ceanothus. This is the Joyce Coulter that's in my yard. And this picture I took just a couple days ago, and it was in bloom. It's sparsely bloomed. In the summer, it was just covered with blooms and covered with bumblebees. They just love this as well. Some ceanothuses come with white flowers, some have blue flowers. I will say that like this one is big, like I said, it's about 3 feet tall and about maybe 5 feet wide in this beautiful mound. And the deer don't bother it, but they do eat the little young ones that was right next to it. So I think once they mature, it's not as interesting to the deer, but I do put cages around them when they're small. It tolerates quite a variety of different soils. But when you look on any of those websites where you're thinking about getting native plants from, like if you go into the California Native Plant Society, it just opened today. And I went on and ordered some things, and some plants they only have 10 of. So you want to be sure you get in there and get your order. But if you're not familiar with that type of ceanothus, then you can always go to CalScape and look up and see, all the different attributes of that ceanothus, because there's so many. There's a lot of different ones. Manzanita is another great plant. This is also in our demonstration garden, and this picture on the lower right shows what a beautiful mounding. I didn't prune that. This is what I'm telling you. Like, this is easy peasy. I look good. They're like, oh, your garden looks so good. I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't done anything. So it stays in this nice mound, which is gorgeous. And it grows, this one, it's a Howard McMinn. I think it's a little bit over 3 feet. Some of these numbers they give you are sort of ballpark sizes, but it's not going to get very big. Has these beautiful white flowers that are bell-shaped. So hummingbirds like them as well. Bees like them. And then these berries later in the year that the birds will come. And one thing to remember with manzanitas is we want to prune them when they're dormant. If we prune manzanita is very finicky about being pruned. If you prune it in the wet season, if you prune it in the winter, it may die back and it may actually kill the plant. So you want to prune it when it's dormant, and that would be in the summer, late summer for this plant. But again, all these plants have a little bit different, not a lot of maintenance and not a lot of pruning. You don't really have to do a lot of pruning, but if you're going to prune, you have to watch the timing on some of them. Lots of different California sages or salvias. In the upper right is a hummingbird sage with a hummingbird on it. That tolerates a lot of shade, so it's a good for a shady area. In Los Osos, probably would tolerate quite a bit of sun as well, because it does well in sun to shade. The lower one is a Clevelandii that's in my yard. Unfortunately, the label came off that one, so I don't know which one that is, but it's growing great. They're really fragrant. But there's a lot of different varieties. Some are like Bee's Bliss is very low growing. It only grows about a foot tall. And Winifred Gilman is about 3 feet tall, I think. And some of the other ones like Pozo Blue can get even larger. So you have to look at each individual one to see really, what the sizing is going to be. Birds love the seeds. This one I will tell you is deer resistant. I have not seen a deer eat any salvias, and I think because they're very fragrant, it's probably not very tasty. So that's a good one for deers that I can vouch for. Coyote brush, we saw a picture of coyote brush earlier. It's has that nice fluffy seed pods that the birds love, but it can get pretty big. I have the native variety in my yard, and some of them are not quite as tall as me, but probably I'd say they're about 4.5 feet tall, and they can get really leggy and woody. But the great thing about them is, like, I cut them down with a sawzall, like 6 inches from the ground, and they pop back up beautiful and green and bushy again in a beautiful habitat. They're easy to maintain that way. It's hard to kill them almost, but there is a smaller version called Pigeon Point. And I think there's another one that's small too that I just saw on the CNPS website. So check that out, because if you're interested in it, it grows in maybe a better habitat for smaller gardens. It does flower most of the year, and it stays evergreen. So it's another great one. And I have never seen the deer eat this either. So that might be a good deer resistant plant. Okay, coffeeberry could be my most favorite plant for birds. It's hard. It's like picking one of your children, but this is awesome. These berries just attract so many birds. This is a hooded oriole, female in this picture on the coffeeberry. I have thrashers on there, I have all kinds of finches, warblers, of course, those bluebirds. These berries are very attractive to them. And I have an interesting story. I do have a lot of deer in my yard, and I got up one morning and the deer was on this bush, and there were 4 of them, and they were eating something. I thought, oh gosh, they're eating my plant. And I went out there, and they didn't touch the plant. They came here and they were eating all these little berries off of the plant. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but they didn't eat the plant. It grows, the one that I have is called Mound San Bruno. I just wrote San Bruno, but it's actually Mound San Bruno. And it's also available on the California Native Plant Society. I noticed this morning when I opened up their website. So I think this is a great plant. And it stays evergreen, has cream colored flowers that are so indistinct, you will barely notice them, but your bush will be buzzing with bees when it's in flower, because it attracts a lot of insects and a lot of bees. Here's a smaller plant. This is a seaside daisy or seaside fleabane. It's about the size of maybe half of a basketball. And the interesting about it is it makes that nice mounding shape. And right now, this is a picture I just took a few days ago. It is in bloom still. It stays in bloom, most, this is fall, right? And it says normally it's in bloom winter, spring, and summer. In the summer, it's really full of blossoms. And I don't know if you can see, but over here, these are just sticks. These are all the seed pods. So the important thing, if you're growing plants for birds, is you don't want to deadhead your plants, because you want to leave the seeds out there for the birds. So again, you get to be a lazy gardener, is what I like to say. So I'll leave that. Now it is deer resistant, but not bunny resistant. So I took the cage off just to take this picture for you, but I do keep a cage on it so the bunnies don't eat it. And, but otherwise it's a beautiful plant. So you might say, where can you buy these plants? Now, you don't have that question because you guys already have a field trip out to Native Sons in Arroyo Grande where you will be able to buy these plants. But if you go onto the Audubon site, they do have a link and you can put in your zip code and it tells you where to get native plants. So they also recommend there the growing grounds in San Luis Obispo and Las Palitas Nursery in Santa Margarita. I'm not familiar with these places in Buellton, Solvang, or Lompoc, but they'll give you some ideas at least. And then some online retailers. It's always good to call ahead though and see if they have what you're looking for. Of course, Wendy did a good job of telling you about the local plant sales, the native California Native Plant Society sale that's coming up, Slow Botanical Gardens she mentioned, and that Calscape website that we were on. If you're on there and you're on a specific plant, there's a link that says nurseries that carry this plant. So if you are looking for something that maybe is hard to find, you can click on that. And then again, I'd call and make sure they still have it, but it's a good way to source. That's a way that I was able to source some native milkweeds that are hard to find. So another thing that's really cool is the CCGGA sale. You guys may already know about that, but that stands for Central Coast Greenhouse Growers Association. And once a year in April, they have a sale. And it's the greenhouse growers that have the sale. So you're able to go into these wholesale nurseries that normally aren't open to the public. And one of them that's open is the Native Sons too. So if you miss the November 10th, I think you said, then keep an eye out or go to their website and check out the sale. They also have other things that are open, like for orchids and for other cultivars and vegetables. So it's not just native plants. It just happens to be that Native Sons is one of the ones that is usually on their list. Okay, so we want to protect the birds. So I'm just going to say a few words about trying to help the birds. If they see the reflection of plants, even indoor plants, in our windows, they may collide with the windows. So we want to try to prevent that. And here's some suggestions from Audubon Society. I love this idea. This is a friend of mine's house in Illinois, and she hung nylon cord about 4 inches apart, and it prevented the birds from seeing the reflection. And you can even see all that greenery that's reflecting in her windows and how a bird might just think, oh, I can just go right through there. So do something, especially if you notice that you are getting birds that are hitting your window. They recommend that if something's within 3 feet, like close to the window, the birds probably won't hit it. Or if it's 30 feet, well, some of us don't have that much room, right? So try doing something like decals. They have paints and markers. You can put exterior screens, move the indoor plants away from the window. And now they're coming out with bird-friendly glass that has printed patterns. I don't know how easy that is to find, but I think whatever we can do, collisions with windows is one of the top reasons that there is decline in birds. So maybe you don't have a garden, although you're all gardeners, so I'm hoping you all have a garden. But if you don't have a formal garden, you can still provide habitat. Maybe it's a bird bath. Like I have this as a bird bath in my yard with acorn woodpeckers on it. Maybe it's some plants in some pots on a porch or a balcony or a rooftop or a window or a vine up the side of the building. So there's other ways to provide plants that can provide seeds and berries or shelter for our native birds. Now I do want to just say a few words about caring for native plants. As was mentioned in your chat is a handout that the Master Gardeners have put together on caring for native plants. But I'll mention a few kind of key concepts. And one is that we really should plant in the fall. So the ideal time is to plant after the first rain. Well, we've already had our first rain. We had a pretty good first rain. And so now's the time to plant. And they usually say until the end of February. that you really shouldn't plant natives after the end of February. But now I just told you that there's a sale in April at a native plant place. So, you can plant them. The reasoning is native plants go dormant in the summer and the late spring. So you like to plant your plants not when they're going to go dormant, right? You want to plant them in their growing season. So that's why a lot of our cultivars, they're growing crazy, right, in the spring and summer. So that's when we have our planting time. But for natives, their growing season is really the winter, the fall and winter. So we want to plant our natives in the fall, and especially take caution with ceanothus, oaks, toyans, and manzanitas, because they're known to have a lot of die off if you try to plant them in their dormant season. So just a couple caveats there. Watering, there are some sort of suggestions for watering, but all these plants are going to have different water needs. You saw that native plants come from wetlands all the way out to the desert. So there can't be like one recipe for watering plants, native plants. So what I try to do is on the first few, I'm out there with my moisture meter. I'm watering them a couple times a week, checking, okay, letting them dry out, and then moisture, maybe that type of soil and that plant, you only need to water once a week until it gets established. Maybe then you can go to every other week, maybe then every month. So you kind of cut it back and just kind of keep an eye on it. But you can water regularly in winter and spring, because that's when it would normally think that it should have water. And then you can water deeply and infrequently in the fall and summer. Now, there's some controversy over how to water. A lot of people prefer to mimic rain and use overhead sprinklers. That's thought to be the best. But I will tell you that my yard was all set up for drip, and I have native plants on drip, and they do fine. You just want to make sure that you're not overwatering. More wilted and damaged plants have been from more overwatering than underwatering. So just kind of keep an eye out on your plants. Oh, sorry, my phone's reminding me to do something. So one of our sayings with native plants is the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. I can tell you how many native plants I've put in, and I thought, ugh, the ceanothus is like, it looks the same as it did last year. It's not doing anything. And then all of a sudden, woohoo, like it's all over the place. So just keep, have to have a little patience for them to fill in, and then they should do great. I also have the philosophy when things sort of die back, like we had, I think it was 2 years ago, where we had all that 100-degree weather, probably even by you near the ocean. And I thought I lost several manzanita, low growing manzanitas. And I thought, well, because I'm a lazy gardener, I'm just going to let that go. I'm going to see what happens. And it looked like they had died. But then the second year and now this year, they're starting to come back. So sometimes if you leave things, the root is still really good and it will come back. It just depends on how much patience you have and where the dead plant is located, because maybe you don't want to look at it. So we'll think of a plan, an action plan. I don't usually like to recommend that unless you're starting from scratch, that we're, it's not really feasible for us to rip everything out and put in all natives. So when an alien dies in my yard, I replace it with a native. Of course, a good goal is to reduce or eliminate your lawn and start small. When you can, dense planting of varying heights is going to provide the best shelter and nesting areas for birds. But, we got to start small and just do what you can. One of my friends gave me this towel because in addition to being a crazy bird lady, apparently I'm a crazy plant lady as well. So this quote was just in the LA Times recently that I wanted to share with you. And it's, humans are dependent on biodiversity. And if we reduce biodiversity, we are reducing our opportunities to survive on this planet. So by helping promote biodiversity in your yards, we're helping ourselves too, and we're helping our planet. So hopefully that can be a goal that we have. And if you're all excited and you decided that you're going to put plants for birds in your yard, you can even get a sign that says that from the Audubon Society. It says, "The native plants in my garden provide food and shelter for our beautiful birds, and they contribute to a healthier world for all of us." So you too, if you donate a certain amount of money to the Audubon Society, they will send you this, this plaque to put in your yard. And there are some of my resources that I've talked about today. And here is a thank you from some of the birds that have visited my yard.